Hi, I'm Helen. Welcome to my channel. In my last video I was cutting up my scraps and I wanted to show you what I do with them. So here are some examples. I was cutting up 6-inch squares. So I sew, just a little further, 9 of these squares together. And I'm going to make a disappearing 9 patch. This works better, or you can do it any way you want to, but I was taught, and it looks a little better if you put a dark one in the middle and you put your darker ones on the outside, and then you're going to put your lighter ones on the inside. Reason being is you're going to cut it down the middle vertically and down the middle horizontal. Then when you take it apart, you have 4 blocks. These particular blocks are 8.5 inch unfinished and will be 8 inches finished, which is what I needed for my nursing home quilts or my lap quilts. Several settings. First one I learned was to just turn one square around and the opposite square around, and then sew them back together. That was one setting. We had a workshop one time, and this one just blew my mind. Never thought about it. You could, like, these could be black and these could be white, and you could have a print here. And by doing that, it looks like you have put sashing in between and cornerstones. So I thought that was a really cool. The way that I used them, I made a windmill. So let's see if I can do this. So when I put mine together, it makes a windmill. You've got your 4 dark spots out here. You see that? A little bit. So now I'm going to show you what I actually did with them. I'm in the process of making a disappearing 9 patch quilt as a lap quilt for a nursing home. So here you see the windmill, and then the next block you see the windmill. And then mine need to be 5 blocks across, so there'll be 5 times 8 is 40. So then I just put 2 more on the end. This is another roll. Love this purple. But here's the windmill. And here's the windmill. Can you see that? Yeah. And then the 2 on the end. So that's called these 4 blocks used to be 9 6-inch squares. So they're called a disappearing 9 patch because you don't realize it's a 9 patch anymore. I also was cutting up two-inch strips and 2.5-inch strips. And like I said, my goal is to make a 40-inch wide quilt, so it's easier for me to make 5 times 8. So this will also end up being an 8.5 inch square unfinished and 8 inch finished. So because I had a bunch of 2 inch strips left over and I needed to use them from another project, that wouldn't work. This would be 6 inches and that wouldn't work, and then another one wouldn't work. It'd be too little or too big. So both of these are 2 inch. I cut these 2 inch. I cut these 2 inch. This is a 2.5 inch. So it ends up being, these will be 3 together. These will be 3 together, that's 6, and then this will end up 2, and that's 8. And of course I have my seam allowance out here. So then if you cut it, this is what it looks like. This is an 8.5 by 8.5 inch square. 2, cut 2, 2, 2.5, 2, 2, excuse me, 2, 2. And when you get through, you end up with an 8.5 inch square. And this is how they look when you put them together. You put them together and you flip-flop them. One will be horizontal, one will be vertical. So this is row 1. So you see each one is flipped. Okay. And this is row 2. So it's going to be the opposite. They're still flipped 9 degrees. But when you put them together, you want to put a horizontal, then you want a vertical. You want a vertical and a horizontal. The next row will be like this one. The 4th row will be like this one. The 5th row will be like this one. 6th row, you just go back and forth. And I'm putting them together 5 across, and they'll equal 40. They're 40 inches plus a 1/4 inch on each side for seam allowance. Okay, I also was cutting up just 2.5. So same thing. I just had to use 4 of them though. 2, 4, 6, 8 to make my, and I'm put them 5 across. The first row will be like this. The second row like this. And so on and so on. I want 5 across, and then 5 more, 5 more. The good thing about it being an odd number, 5, and you don't have, it works out perfectly to start with the next one. If it's horizontal, it's vertical. If it's vertical, it's horizontal. So this will be a pretty quilt too. I also was cutting out some 4.5 by 8.5, which I was calling bricks. So this is what I do with those. Put 5 of these together because they're 8.5. Take away your seam allowance, they're 8. So 5 times 8 is 40, which is what I'm shooting for. So I sew them end to end. Well, I have 5. The next row will have to have 6 in it, because to make it look like a brick wall, you sew it to where It's in the middle of each of these. So you're going to have extra out here. And when you get through, you just take your ruler and your rotary cutter and you just even it up. I think some of you might say, well, why don't you just cut one of them in half? That won't work because this is 8.5 inches long. And if I cut it in half, it'll be 4 1/4. And so I'll get my 1/4 inch seam here, but I'll only get 4 inches here, which means I'm going to be a 1/4 inch short. Going to end up short on this edge. So I'm still going to have to, and I could do that too. If you wanted to, if you didn't want to waste this extra fabric, you could actually do that. Or you could cut 4.5 inch blocks and just put that in there, and then it would fit perfectly. So either way, whichever's easier for you. If you want to just go ahead and put another brick out here and then cut them off even, or you could cut 4.5 inch blocks and put them on either end, because you're also going to need on the other end. And then the next row will be 5 bricks. Same thing. So that you don't have to match any of the seams, which is something I really like. I love not having to match the seams. So that's what I do with the bricks. Another thing you can do with the bricks and still get your 8 inch blocks. These are 8.5 by 4.5. So if you put 2 of them together, then you're going to get 4 and 4 with your seam allowance, so they're 8 by 8. Right now they're 8.5 by 8.5 because they still have their seam allowance on them. But once I sew them together, they'll be 8 by 8. And then sew 2 more together and put them, turn them and put them beside it. So then you end up just flip-flop these back and forth, and you'll have 5 of these in a row also and get your 40 inches. Now all these, you don't have to cut all these the same size I do, depending on your scraps. It does appear in 9 patch. I cut all 6 inch squares. You could cut 4 inch squares or 5 inch squares. I cut 6 inch squares because I wanted my blocks to end up 8.5 unfinished. But they'll be smaller. You could cut 7 inch, 8 inch, whatever you want to, and or 12 inch even. They're just going to be bigger and they're going to be smaller. And you probably won't have to have a 40 inch quilt, so you can make it whatever size you want. Same thing with your bricks. These are 4.5 by 8.5. You could cut them 2.5 by 4.5, 6.5 by 3.5, 10.5 by 5.5. Just whatever's half, it works out pretty good. Because this is 8, this is 4. So it seems the dimensions seem to work out pretty well like this. So I hope this is giving you some ideas and some ways to use up your scraps. Like I said, we pay for all of the fabric, so there's no need in us throwing away parts of it. Let me get some of these out and show it. So let's use up those scraps and keep them out of the landfill and make somebody happy with a nice quilt. So I hope this has helped you. I hope it has given you some ideas. My next video will have 3 or 4 more ideas from the different sizes that I cut. So thank you for visiting my channel. Please subscribe and give me a thumbs up, and I appreciate it. See you later.